because that's when people see things. Don't make that face. You got to do that again real quick. That was awesome.
Sorry, man. That intro just makes me feel like I could conquer the world.
You can conquer the world. And tonight you're going to conquer the world in finishing.
Oh, I need to. I need to learn that.
It took me a little while to write that one, but when I found all the pieces to it, I was like, "Yep, that exit right there, the very last part, that was what I started with." And I said, "Okay, I need to build around this."
Yeah, that drum at the end just makes you it needs to be louder and grrr.
We can make it louder. We can do whatever we want to. It's our music. We don't have to go ask anybody for permission. So, welcome to the Whatnot Podcast. Thank you for joining us. It's Wednesday night, 9:00. I am MikeZ.
I'm Chris.
And tonight we're going to be talking about finishing. So hopefully my voice will keep up with this one because this might be a long-winded one for me.
Oh, I thought you were going to have a long-winded one. I was going to let you have a great little monologue that just led right into your expertise and
led right into knowledge. Save me a minute.
I'm here to support you any way I can.
So tonight we're going to talk about basics in finishing. I'm not going to go into details as far as what products to use. I'll tell you what I use. I'll tell you what I've had great success with. But I'm not going to go into every line of this and mixtures of that. And I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. We can have 5 of these, no problem. But instead, it's more of like troubleshooting. What dyes versus stains? What's the difference? Wash coats, sanding, correct sanding sequencing and why it's important. We're also going to look at sheen. I think sheen is one of those things that a lot of people don't know how to tell or how to say. It looks shiny. So tonight I'm going to kind of give you an idea of what shiny means and a good way to keep everyone on the same scale, as well as if you're a beginner, you have never done any woodworking or wood finishing. I have a great little thing set up here. Grass is grain. That's what I teach in all of my classes. Whenever I do presentations, grass is grain. So I have all that showing for you. And then also, why not to use steel wool so I can make everyone upset in the entire world who uses it. And then a couple of finishes that I use. And that's what I got. I'm just going through let's see, what do I have now? 48 photos. This is going to be a long one.
You got this. And yes, Kyle, I did finish the vacuuming.
Good evening, everybody. Ooh, Gerald's doing it double time. He's over on YouTube and Facebook.
Oh, wow. That's multitasking. I couldn't do that. I'm barely here just on this.
So that's everybody. Thank you for joining us. So this should be, well, hopefully some fun. And what I plan on doing is going in depth with each one of these kind of subtopics a little bit more on my YouTube channel because everyone's been telling me to do it. And I don't know. I'll get to it eventually. I promise. I know Chris always gives me slack for it. It's like, dude.
Yeah, there's so few things that some of us as woodworkers are what I would call experts at, or extremely knowledgeable. And Mike by far is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met when it comes to finishing. And so it's like, dude, you're just spraying stuff. Talk to people about your knowledge. Drop some knowledge on these people because it's just bottled up there. You don't have to give away everything, but just give us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no secrets other than I've made a ton of mistakes. And so I've learned from those mistakes, and that's how I've arrived at where I'm at. I can say that one of the first things I started out with, like a lot of people do, was Minwax. I'm still not a big fan of Minwax. And I will always, it's not that I'm preaching to the choir about it. I have had more issues. I've had more calls across the country working, where we do for the woodworking shop. I've had more people call in and they give me a few simple details if they had this finishing issue. And usually I ask, is it a yellow can? Yes, it is. Boom, there's your issue. It typically stems around in an inexpensive product that's widely purchased from the box store. There you go. That's the little bit of it all.
There you go.
So, okay. Wait, you did send me something. I don't know if I uploaded that.
Yeah, it's all good.
Such a slacker.
I've made a lot of mistakes too.
Oh, Gerald. There you go. So, see, Chris, you got the knowledge in your head. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm just not sure if that statement has a lot of facts based.
So, in case you're not watching and you're listening later, Gerald liked to tell us that if you keep the knowledge in your head, it will cause your hair to fall out.
I think,
yeah. And by the way, this is 100% need to get my tuft cut. It is what it is.
You can go see my barber. He'll take care of you.
Not sponsored. All right. So where do we start here? I had very poor planning on this because I just started grabbing everything. All right. Let's go with, man, there's so many places. I'm so sorry. Let's not upset everyone right off. Okay. Grass is grain. The biggest thing that I can tell you is that in wood, I like to think of all the wood fibers when you're sanding, when you're cutting, anything like that. Think of grass, how grass likes to follow the sun from the morning to the afternoon. And in high noon, it likes to stand straight up. Typically to your fingers, it feels nice, but at the same time in wood, it actually feels more rough. It doesn't feel super smooth. And this is why. So there's little fibers in grain in the wood itself. And this is what you're combating. This is what you're working with. This is also what causes so many issues, is not properly treating this. And so therefore, if you raise the grain whenever you're sanding, what that does is it excites the grain just like the grass. Okay. So all the fibers stand straight up. Everything's very happy. And the very basics of this is that, when you're sanding or anything like that, and you're trying to get the finish done, because I always found the biggest problem with finishing, the biggest gripe of finishing, no one wants to do it. There's a real easy explanation to it. And I figured out the secret to it. It is, you spend about 30% of your time designing, planning, trying to figure out what you're going to build. Then 60% of that time putting it all together, making all the cuts, gluing and trimming and, sanding and doing all that, to where basically the last 10% of finishing, 90% of that work's already done. You're tired of the project. You've seen it every day, or you've seen it for 8 weeks, however long it takes you to do your project. And usually by the end, you're just done. You're tired. And so therefore everyone just gets really frustrated with that last 10% because they're trying to hurry. They want to get done now. Now all that passion and all that drive that they had to build that piece is now, almost ready to be done. They're so excited. But finishing sometimes is all about the prep work. Literally, I can tell you, finishing, as long as I have, it's all about the prep work. So everything you've done in that 90% makes that last 10% all worthwhile. There's my speech on finishing. And look, we lost a viewer. All right. So if you think of raising the grain, okay, what that's going to do is it's going to show you scratches. It's going to show you swirl marks from sandpaper if you're using a random orbit sander. It's going to show you things like certain planer marks that maybe you didn't get out all the way, chatter, things along those lines, to where you can actually see them if you raise the grain. Here you have a couple of actual, not chatter marks in this. These are more like the milling marks from the planer or the joiner. They're the horizontal lines where the grain's going north, up and down, north, south. The horizontal lines, or east and west, is that type of machining mark. So what you want to remember is that when you're sanding, having the proper sanding sequence is the best place to start. Chris, I'll let you do a little bit of this one, since you might have a little bit of knowledge in this department.
Just a little.
I'll drink water while you do that.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that especially with where we work is we see is people come in with finished pieces that they've already stained, and underneath that stain, when they've added that stain, especially the darker stain, is it makes and accentuates all of the flaws that they didn't remove during the sanding process. And so sanding is probably the most tedious part of the job, but by far the most important, because if you start too fine, you have rough stuff underneath that you can't see till the finish is put on. If you start too coarse, then you have to do a lot of extra work with the next sequencing in the grit to remove those previous scratches. And so what a lot of people do is one of a couple of mistakes. One is they'll start really coarse, they'll say 60, and then they'll try to jump to a 150. Well, you're not going to remove the scratches made by 150 or by a 60, because 150 grain is much shorter, so it doesn't have that depth of cut that the 60 did. So you'll never reach the bottom of those valleys, and that makes for a really horrible job. Or you're on the other end of the spectrum where you think, oh man, I don't want to do 60, 80, or 100. I'm just going to go right to 120 because this feels pretty good. It came off the planer pretty smooth, so I'm just going to hit it with a 120. All the planer did was burnish it and take those fibers and lay them down. And if you've ever mowed the grass on when it's really dry, will keep your grass thing going. A lot of times you'll just lay the grass down, but it may not cut it very clean. Well, that's what happens if you're using too fine of a grit. Is the planer will smooth that out, but starting with too fine of a grit, you don't get all of the deep nicks and scratches out of there. And again, you have the same problem. So you wind up with tooling marks showing instead of grain marks. So ideally, you want to start with as fine a grit as you can to remove the scratches necessary to start that sequence. And whatever grit that is, whether it's 100 or 80 or 120, whatever it is, you never want to skip more than one grit in the range. And that is a crucial point. People say, well, I can't afford to buy that. Well, then buy a smaller pack. But you don't want to skip more than one grit. So if you start with 100, you can safely skip 120, but you better not skip 150. Then if you do 150, you can safely skip 180, but you better not skip 220. And depending on what you're going to do, that'll determine to what grit range you actually end at. And that's another problem that a lot of people have when it comes to the sanding process, is they'll sand way too fine, and then they put a stain on there, and they wonder why the stain's all blotchy and not a good color. And so that's the other side of the thing. If you close those grains off in the wood too much, then you wind up closing them off where the stain can't penetrate in, and then you get funky colors. So
I've got an image for you because I knew you would go down that road.
Okay.
We've done plenty of this.
So, is that piece that I did? Oh, no,
it's not yours. But here in the very middle is properly sanded. Over to the left-hand side has got a lot of heavy swirl marks in it, a lot of improper sanding techniques, and stopped at too fine of a grit or too coarse of a grit. And then on the other side is just bare. It was kind of a mixed bag of everything, but more proper sanding technique as far as not trying to angle the sander. It's a random orbit sander, it's not an angle grinder. But at the same time, so you don't have the swirl marks, but you have just an inconsistent sanding pattern where you're trying to sand real fast to get it done, and that's what it looks like. So up the middle is kind of where you want to be. So therefore, it looks more uniform. But
it's crucial that you do this right. You can't just, like Mike said, you've got to this point. Don't bail now. Don't ruin all your hard work. So
yep. Because no matter what, it's all going to come down to the finish, which it shouldn't. And you shouldn't worry so much about that. If the prep work was done properly, the finish is the easy part. I mean, to me, that is the easy part, is finishing. I'm like, the building and everything, it takes time, effort, and energy and all that. And I'll do the finishing. That's fun. So I have this that I found in it's an older book. But basically, it's a sanding grit progression that you can tell from the 80 grit on the far left side that the deep scratch is still apparent in the 100 grit and then still apparent there in the 180. So it doesn't ever fully get it out. But if you step your grits properly, then it works really good. I guess my secret that I really like about sanding is 100 grit is the most underrated grit. Reason being is that 80 sometimes is too aggressive for what you're dealing with. If you have something that's plywood, 80 is way too aggressive. If you have something that came fresh off the planer and you have a lot of that burnishing and some of those chatter marks or the milling marks, they're very similar to chatter marks, which is basically from a wide belt sander or any belt sander where the belt joint comes across. Sorry, I had to get a breath there. the 80 grit sometimes is too aggressive for that. And so therefore I think 100 is really nice because a lot of people just do 120. They're like, no, 120 does everything for me. It's really good. Sometimes that's not coarse enough. So I found 100, 150, 180 sweet spots right there. Done. So if you have to do a minimum of 3 grits, that would be the 3 grits I would choose. And the reason being is that you didn't want to skip more than 1 grit. So 100, skip 120, then 150. And the reason that you come back with the 180 is because they're so close that you'll make sure that you're going to get rid of that 150 scratch, because the 150 is really going to do a pretty good job of getting rid of the 100, because it's not 80. Okay. 80 is a lot deeper than 100. I'm trying to remember. I think it's a 1,000th of an inch scratch deeper. Like, there's a pretty good consideration between 80, 100, 120. There's a lot of jump right there. So if you pick it right, you're good.
Yeah,
So,
and it's pretty important because the idea is your finest grit that you use will likely never exceed or go deeper than the lowest value of the first grit you use. That's kind of the ideal scenario, is the depth of cut that you make with your first grit, working through those sequencing. That last grit should perfectly plane that off and even out all of the scratches.
yep,
And you can see in that image that that's pretty much what it's doing there.
Yep. I've seen a lot of people try to explain sanding process is the other way around, when really the deepest scratch of the 80 should pretty much go away at the very end of 180. That's your depth of cut. And so that's why it's so important to sand properly, because that right there is what causes blotching, is what causes improper sandings, trying to speed it up, trying to get it done quickly. It's not the way to do it, because you're really going to hurt yourself in the end. Like this one here has got a nice scratch right in it that hasn't been removed. The wood itself is really rough, but it was sanded with a 220. So therefore it feels, to your hand, it feels smooth, but all that grass is just laying down. Like when the lawnmower goes across it with the tires, it's just laying down. It's still long right there. And what that does is that when you excite it back up, now it's going to be really rough. And that's what you don't want. Okay. So it's all about prep work. So there's our sanding thing. There's our sanding tutorial. Thanks so much. Oh, I did have a sanding image. Not a big fan of oscillating sanders, sheet sanders, because they just do zigzags. So if you're going to do it, you have to go with the grain. So in this case, left and right. If you're using an oscillating sander, which basically just oscillates back and forth, left and right, you have to go with the grain with that. Otherwise, you'll have zigzags when you go north and south against the grain. That's why random orbits are so important. If you don't know what a random orbit is, it's simply a spinning disc with an offset oscillation to it. So it kind of looks like little pigtails everywhere. But if you don't put down a lot of pressure, like really the sander is the tool. No, sorry, the sander is the machine. The sandpaper is the tool. Let the tool do let the tool do its job.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, not that time. Yeah. All right. So now that we're sanding, let's talk about the biggest waste of money in finishing, preconditioner. So here's another tip for you. You don't need to buy it if you do the sanding properly. Really, this is just there for people who wanted to skip, 80, 220. Then they go to put on the finish and, I've got all this darkness. So what blotching is where you have a darker area where the oil or the stain or the dye, whatever it may be, has taken more color in those areas. Because think of the grass again. This is a bigger open pocket of grass. So all the grain is excited, but they're excited and wide open. So all of the stain falls into it. Or the oils, like usually in this case here, this was a Danish oil with color into it. I think it was golden oak or something. So it's got pigment in it. And what happens there is that you basically just have pigments that collect in one spot, making it darker. This is another one. This is done on purpose, though. This is, you want those milling marks. You want that missanding so you can see where it was sanded very fine in order to create that rustic look. There is benefits to doing this, but if you're getting this look and you want it to be a consistent finish, such as this one, there's your problem, is that you weren't sanding properly. So.
Yep. Big key there.
We'll do troubleshooting next. Ooh, okay, here we go. So we've done that. I'm sorry, I'm just going through everything that we got here because there's a lot of pictures. Oh, dyes versus stains. Welcome to the club. If you haven't used a dye or a stain let me just tell you that basically the difference is the actual size of the colorants, if you will. In a stain, pigments are what's used, and usually they're bigger, chunkier, more organic, almost like soil, like dirt. They're gritty in a way. So when they filter them out and everything, they do their best when they're making stains. But at the same time, if you were to take stain and rub it in your fingers, you'd almost feel it. Stain is a semi-transparent colorant that is applied to wood to give it different looks. Such as with this here is to give that wood that would have been a really kind of blonde color more depth and more browns to it and stuff like that. So the difference though is that with that semi-transparentness, stain pigments being so large, I want you to think of like a football. Stain pigments would be the size of a football in your mind. Dyes are the size of a pinhead. Okay. So like a sewing needle, they are super fine, almost like just blow in the wind dust. They're so fine. Once they are dispersed in water, alcohol, oil, whatever the transfer medium is, they need a transfer medium. They don't come naturally wet. Pigments don't either, but they need something too. But dyes basically, they will sit, but they don't gather the same way. They kind of evenly distribute across the wood. So like with this one here, your dye gives you a little bit more pop in the figure because you have darker areas and lighter areas. So there's a little bit more dye gathering, which is a good thing because in this case here, you want to accentuate that where, say, this one, you don't want to accentuate that. Dyes wouldn't do this as bad. They'd still be a little bit there because you still need proper sanding, but it wouldn't be as bad. Stains, though, as you can tell, there's not as much depth of color. There's not as much just overall richness in color. Dyes are very rich. And that is because, boom, dyes double darken every coat that you apply. So they work really good if you want to do any kind of a look to them, so you want to get a darker, richer color, but you don't want to lose the transparency. And that's what's key of dye. That's why they've been used for actually now over a century. Dyes are great because you could have like the top orange color is very light orange. It's just kind of a underlining hue of an orange color, orange yellow. And then you could put stain over that if you wanted to. You could put then Danish oil with a dark, color in like a black walnut on there. And you always have that little bit of orange coming through. And it's got what's called chatoins. So in this case, we're seeing 3 different applications of the same dye. And you can tell that it starts to darken, starts to richen more. And that's what you're looking for with dye. That's the beauty of it. Let's go to stained wood here. What stains do is that you can see in this cherry piece, they really start to accentuate all those little pockets. Okay. They really start to fill in and they kind of hide the prettiness of this cherry where the dye didn't. So what people do is that they put on what's called a wash coat. A wash coat is simply Zinsser universal sanding sealer. You want something like this. You don't want just a regular shellac because you really want it to be wax free if at all possible. So it doesn't have any adverse reactions. And I have a saying for that later. But what a wash coat does is on the right-hand side is it evenly distributes the stain a little bit better, more like a dye. So it's not gathering so much in the darker pockets that you can see on the left. And on the left side, you can see where there's kind of these darker areas, not blotching necessarily, but it's accentuating parts of the grain that are softer and more open of the cherry. Where on the right side, they're definitely cleared out. And by the way, if you're listening to this afterwards, it'd be much easier to see the video so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Just throwing that out there. But yeah, Zinsser seal coat for sure. Great stuff. And a lot of times, I think it's a 4-pound cut in the can. A lot of times you can cut that in half with denatured alcohol to make it a nice thin layer. That's actually what a wash coat is. If you use just the Zinsser seal coat as it is, it would actually seal off too much of the grain when you're trying to apply the stain. So what a wash coat is really thinned out shellac, basically. You can also do it with lacquer sealers. You can make wash coats out of that. Just the most popular way of doing it is with a brush. So,
and it dries extremely fast.
It's alcohol. Very fast. Evaporates very fast, very quick, ready to jump on. Plus, one thing I like to tell everyone is that water is on one side, oil's on the other. They don't mix, but alcohol is the thing right in between. So it is a medium. So if you apply the shellac alcohol first, you can apply water. If you apply water, apply the alcohol, then you can apply an oil, or the other way around. That way, the alcohol, it bonds with the oil. It also bonds with the water based. Just simple
Yep.
things. That'll be a whole video in itself. Jeez.
Not in a, were you going to talk much about the importance of that wax free versus the
Well,
wax?
yeah, I've got. Okay, so we
Okay.
can go into troubleshooting next. So when we mention wax free, what we're talking about is contaminants. Wax is, and this is my favorite saying. Once you go wax, you don't go back. And the reason is because once wax is on there, there really is no way, there's no easy way to remove it or simply say oopsie and then try to take it back off or apply another coat. I have seen people, I've done it myself, to where you can apply over wax, but it must be a high quality carnauba, very hard, very high melting point. Usually most people are just using brie wax, which is nothing more than just beeswax and toluene. That toluene is basically it kind of liquidates it and keeps it in a liquid state. So
What you're saying is Mr. Miyagi was wrong. You can't wax on and wax off.
oh no, you're just removing the excess is all he was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're polishing.
How much time we got left? Oh my gosh, we're only 20 minutes into it. I'm just kidding. So with that said, what you're going to come into, wax is one thing. Wax is not that big of a deal. Okay. As far as, but it really needs to be your last step. And the reason being is that wax is one of those things that as you're going through the finishing process and you're going down the finishing trail and you're trying this finish and trying that finish, when you have gotten a schedule is nothing more than you sand, you top coat, or you sand. It's just all the finishing steps. They call it a schedule. Once you have a schedule that you're comfortable with, it doesn't matter if it's oil, water based, doesn't matter. What I've noticed though is that when you add wax, there's this depth of color, just like whenever someone waxes a car. Okay, the color looks deeper, it looks richer, and it's because of the wax. So if you've got something, let's say, for instance, like a wooden bowl is a great example, because usually they're figured, they're burls, or something to where there's some real nice texture to it. And you go ahead and you sand it up to the insane amount of 400. That's a whole nother topic. But if you sand it up, you put your finish on, when you put wax on it and you let that wax melt in that thin layer, it just makes it just glow like nothing else. Wax, and that's it though. That's the last thing you need to do. That's why once you go wax, you don't go backwards, because trying to remove the wax is an absolute pain in the butt. Oh, that was long-winded. You got anything to say? I'm going to take a break.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. I've made that mistake before where you've done something and need to try to take that wax off, and you're either sanding it or doing some kind of something to loosen that wax up. But if you don't get it done right, man, your adhesion is horrible, and then it affects everything after that. So try to stay away from that wax for sure. Now that's not just wax on the part. If you are spraying some kind of product like Pledge or some other cleaning agent in another part of the shop, those little droplets can actually land from across the shop on your part and create the same adhesion as if you just put wax on there. And it can create other problems too with different lacquer blemishes and things like that. And I'm sure you'll hit on that. So
yeah,
you got to watch it when you start getting into that finish, man. Finish is a finicky little beast. So anything that can create issues with adhesion or with how the any agents in there start to dry, then it creates all kinds of problems.
yeah. So silicone is the enemy there, because nothing. If you've ever used anything silicone, like a glue brush, for instance, in the shop, you'll notice that nothing sticks to the silicone. Once it dries, you can peel it off. Well, the same is said, Pledge, Indust, any of those that contain a silicone. I always joke about it because it seemed like you'll spray something 1 minute, it's perfectly fine. You spray it again, and all of a sudden, here's all these fish eyes. Fish eyes are kind of like this. Okay, they're areas where the finish has pooled around the contaminant. Some people see this as orange peel, but it's not actually orange peel, because if you look at it, you'll see there's no shine whatsoever in the centers of them. Usually you can see the center of it because it really does. It looks like a fisheye. You have that dot in the center, and then you have this pool around it. So what I always joke about is that if someone comes in with this or something like that, I said, oh, someone spraying Pledge about a half a mile away, because it always seems like it travels. It never dries. And once it lands on your piece, because it always happens to be your piece it lands on, then this happens. And unfortunately, you got to wash and you got to remove it. Ooh, I forgot that. Let me go look at that real quick while I talk about something else. I just remembered something.
Yeah, okay. Leave me hanging
Leave
on
you
the
on
hook
the
there like a fisheye.
You're welcome.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when you start getting into that finishing stage, it just there are so many little things, and I come from a cabinet background, so I'm more accustomed to just straight up either urethane or lacquer. And years ago, back in 01, 02, when I started at the woodworking shop, I tried to start learning some of the finishing stuff. I was reading all the books I could get my hands on, and it's just like, you know what? I'm going to stick with the basics. This stuff I know, stuff I can work with, easy to apply. But the more into woodworking I get, you start dabbling in some of those other things, some of the oils and some of the variations of oils and some of the blends and some of the custom mixes. And there's so much out there now. It's like it'll make your head spin. So it's important that you use a quality product regardless of which way you go, and something that you know is going to be consistent throughout. And that part of the issue that I know Mike's had the problem with it, but I have too, because I used to buy a lot of my stuff from the big box. And that yellow can, man, a lot of times it'll let you down, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
staining side, because the color, I've gotten two drastically different colors before and went to apply them on the same board to do a test sample for a customer, and they looked identical. Look, what's up with that? So anyway,
It's all about quality control. And a lot of times they're making so much of that stuff because they're just pumping it out when it's like what is it? $12, I think it is, a quart, or yes, I don't know. I haven't looked at it here recently. I was walking down the aisle to see if they still had it in stock at the box store since Sherwin-Williams bought them. But I know it's really inexpensive. Always remember though, you get what you pay for. There's not always going to be some sort of. I remember there was one year where they had raw linseed oil. If you don't know what raw linseed oil is, it's called linoleum. It never really dries. It always kind of stays in this soft, squishy format. I mean, you think it's hard, but really linoleum's kind of squishy in a way. If you were to, put a high heel into it or something, it will dent. Well, one year for sure, it was like every single stain, people would apply any kind of finish over it. Usually it's always polyurethane. That was a real bummer. But because it never really fully dried, and I've had people do 6 weeks on some of the calls I've taken, it would turn white underneath the finish because moisture had stuck to the finished piece. And usually they're in the basement. That's okay. I mean, you can finish in the basement. But the problem is that the moisture in there was sticking to it, and it only showed up as soon as they put the finish over it. And it was usually an oil-based finish. Usually it was in the yellow can as well. But that was always the problem, is that basically it would turn white, and then it's like, well, how do I get rid of that? Unfortunately, you got to sand it all back down because it's under polyurethane. Really, polyurethane is probably one of the more durable finishes that I like. But the downside is that there's no real repairing it if something goes wrong, as far as like that goes. Now, if it was lacquer, yeah, we got stuff to do with that. Let's see. I did ask if anyone has any questions real quick before we get into the next part. Opinions on Makita versus Festool sander or any other.
Merca.
Oh, yeah, Merca. I didn't want to say that. So I'll let you take that one.
Okay. It really depends on what format. Are you talking about disc, sheet? If you're talking about just sort of an orbital sander, it really depends. Merca, if I'm not mistaken, has an electric and an air option.
Correct. Oh, Lord, he is gone. Frozen.
Does not make an air
He's
option
coming back.
For most of their sanders. You went away too.
Oh, sorry, Chris. You're going to have to repeat from starting at Merca. I think they have an air and a electric,
okay.
and then it just went.
Okay. Well, we can do that. If you're dealing with an air, that's a whole nother animal. But if you're looking at electric, it really depends on your application. If you're comparing just traditional 5-inch, for instance, they both will do the job. It just depends on whether you want to be part of the green club or not. Merca is a little less known to the sort of the hobby world. They're known a little more into in the commercial world. A lot of some of the cabinet guys that don't use air tend to use that a lot. So it really just it depends on what you're going to do with it. But for basic sanding, I don't think you could go wrong with either one. If it's air sanding, there are better options. Dynabrade makes a fantastic sander. I personally have used the Eka sand, which is comparable to the Merca in regards to. Matter of fact, it's almost identical to the Merca in style. And I will tell you, I absolutely loved that sander. I had to give it back when I left my old job, but I do still have the little 3x4, and those are really, really good sanders. So, again, it comes down to if you're willing to pay that much for a sander, you do get what you pay for and well worth the value and the finish because you get a lot more consistency on your finish, more consistency on the orbit. Better if you do get lazy and start putting a lot of weight on it, it's better counterbalance. So it doesn't start creating a lot of the pigtails like some of the cheaper sanders will. So the value is there, and either one of them would serve you good.
Yep. So Festool does offer more orbital sizes. So they offer like a 3 and a 5 millimeter. So if you're going to stick in that more aggressive range, the 5 millimeter would be a good choice, especially in the 6 inch. But if you're going to do a lot of finish sanding, like the 120s and higher, then the 3 millimeter would be a good orbit. So there's also that. They have a lot more of that. And the Merc, I haven't really looked into how many of those. I think they have the 2 as well, but they don't do it on every sander like Festool. Festool covers pretty much every sander with a particular orbiting pattern for the type of job it's going to be used in.
The one thing I would say maybe would lean back towards the Festool is I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Merca has one of those digital motors where you have to power it on with a digital button, which means that's an electronic part that if something's going to fail, that would be the one thing that would fail before anything else. And obviously, if it heats up, those things tend to they act like a circuit breaker. So as they heat up, they're going to shut off to save themselves. Those little motors get a little hot. So that will be the one thing I would say if you're using it for any extended period. I would lean definitely towards the Festool because the Festool is not going to have that problem. It's a standard switch. Whereas if, like I said, the Merc, I think, has that digital input that turns it on and off, and that can have problems. So.
And I don't remember the actual term for it. I think it's MMS or MSS or something, but there's an electronic module inside of Festool tools for sanders especially that when you apply more pressure or you're pushing down harder, creating more load, then it ups the amperage, giving you more power. There's also a balance though, because if it'll kind of listen and learn based on the weight and the speed and everything that you're applying to it. So it kind of tries to fit, operate the best it can given the operator who's operating it. But if you don't want to pay that price, you still want that technology. Chris and I both used this, the Bosch ROS. Seriously, it's $79 and you can get all the benefits. And I think the bigger one's like 200, the 6-inch. If they have it in stock anywhere in the world. But yeah, I've been through 3 Craftsman now. I really like the Craftsman sanders for only being $30. I mean, they did a really good job sanding wise. They had as much power as everyone else, but the switch doesn't last. Like it was a year and I had to replace it. So I went back to the Bosch, which I've had for 5 years now. Still working like a champ, making some funny noises now, but I ain't going to say why. So anyways, yeah, as far as that goes, I mean, you get what you pay for, but sometimes if you're just doing like a little bit here and there, not 8 hours a day, boom, that'll take care of it, the Bosch. So, and Gerald, sorry. Where's that at? Gerald asks, can you talk about how to test finishes to see if they have expired? He uses the drop on a glass test. Basically, you're looking for separation. I don't do a lot of testing on it. Actually, I get more of the finishes that I possibly can that are already expired on purpose, so they're cheaper. And they will do an okay job if you know how to treat them, if you know how to give them what they're missing. A lot of finishes, basically, they have what's, just like everything else in the entire world, in the food industry, for instance, they have binders, they have a resin, and they have an evaporative liquid. A lot of times it's the binders that start to lose the bond between the evaporative liquid and the resin. or it's the evaporative liquid that has dried out. There's a hole in the can, the lid wasn't on all the way. Sometimes you can bring that back with whatever the thinning agent is. It all depends on the finish. But for the most part, you can kind of get away with using old finish. So I don't really stay away from it. I don't like the game of, oh, it's been sitting on the shelf too long. I've been in enough finishing businesses that that's almost kind of a way just to get product to move so they can order more. I worked at a paint shop. That was one of the ways they did it, is that they, once it got, you always rotated stock. Don't get me wrong. If they don't rotate stock, they should be smacked in the face. But if you had an old can sitting there, I've had pre-catalyzed lacquer, which is only supposed to have a 1 year shelf life. I've got one that's 5 years old. It still finishes fine. I put a test piece out there, just to see what it would do. The only thing it did was it yellowed a little bit more than the rest of the lacquer that I use. That was it. Finish wise, everything was still top notch. So actually, I would like to go into that with Gerald and how he does that. And Gerald, you need to get on the show, bud. So therefore, we can talk about that, because I really like to know why you test them too, like what your experiences are as far as troubleshooting and why you've come to do that with your finishes. That would be interesting.
And now I have had some issues with some water-based finishes before, where I know for a fact they went through at least a couple freeze thaw scenarios, um, due to where I stored them, and I found that I was getting some adverse results. And then it dawned on me that that was the only potential thing I could think of, because they really weren't on the shelf a long time, but going through that freeze thaw and that really cold and then back up, that's the only thing I can think of that would really cause some problems, or at least it has in my shop.
Freeze thaw is definitely one thing to look at. Usually, if it has a flattening compound in it, so therefore it's not gloss and you can't see all the way to the bottom of the can. They kind of the way that all works, it actually starts to make like these little strings in the finish, and then when you try to stir it up, they just won't mix in. Old lacquer that I've had that I know that it's getting to the point of like it's not going to work anymore is that it does not mix up well. Like no matter how much you mix it up, when you go to pour it in, there's still like solids at the bottom. They're just not going to mix up. The resins themselves have gotten to an age to where they just don't want to dissolve. So you get that. But if you want to get into finishing and you like storing a bunch of cans, hey, finishing's for you. I'll say that much. Where are we at? Oh, it's got plenty of time. Sweet. All right. So talking about that. We're talking about that. Okay. So this was a contaminant on the surface. This one's in a water-based situation where there's an oil on the surface. This usually happens when someone decides that after sanding and polishing, I'm going to lean on this board to pick up this rag that I dropped on the ground. This would be where their hand went. You can see in the top of the picture there's a lot more. That was actually like pledge or something up there. But also remember to wipe down your pieces. It's not absolutely crucial, because I'll tell you this, that anytime you're using a polyurethane, think of two pieces of glass being laid on top of each other. They never marry in a chemical way. They only bond in a mechanical way. So they kind of have to have scratching. That's why you scuff. Scuffing is the practice of basically removing burrs, giving the finish a little bit of a scratch from sandpaper. I see a lot of problems with people that sand way too fine. Okay, so your sealer coat, it should be sanded with or one step higher than whatever the final grit was that you sanded with the piece. So if you finish with 180, you can sand sealer, because sealers are usually a high build and they sand very softly and very quickly. So they level out quickly. There's no reason to sand sealer with 400. That's just going to load up sandpaper and you're going to be disappointed, and you're going to blame the sandpaper when really it's too fine for the job. When you get into top coats, from there you put on your next top coat. So whether it's lacquer, whether it's polyurethane, then you move up 220, then you move up 320, and then usually on your final you don't have to touch 400, but that's up to you what you're trying to do too. Yeah. But the real basic is whatever your final grit was on the bare wood, you can start with sealer if you want to. It all depends on the project, or one grit higher. So in that case, 220. Then you put on your finish, and then you can do 320. Put on your finish, you can do 400. It's really up to you. But I see a lot of people that, put sealer on. They did like 220, they put sealer on. Now they're at 320, 400. Then they complain it's loading too much. Too fine of a grit, man. Too fine. So,
or they sanded it before the finish was cured.
That happens too. Yeah. Don't sand it too soon. Read the directions. Dry time is just, tack time is when you can handle it. Dry time is when you can sand it. There's reasons for instructions. Let's talk about bubbles. So yeah, I do a lot of my finishing outside. Yeah. Everyone's going to have an opinion on that. And I welcome them in the comments. Please tell me how crazy of an idea that is. I don't mind at all. But bubbling essentially is when in a porous wood, so let me find a porous wood picture. So here, for instance, you have a lot of open pores. And what happens is you get air in these pores because they have to be filled with something. Originally it was water. Now it's air because they're dried. Hey, principles. What happens is if you go to finish something and the wood itself is too hot, not the air temperature, the wood itself is too hot, then what happens is that air tries to escape because that finish is probably not going to be 100 and 150 degrees. It's probably going to be whatever was sitting downstairs and, wherever or inside or whatever. Usually it's colder. When that happens, the air tries to escape and then the film forms over top of it, causing bubbles. So real simple practice is make sure the wood's inside, out of the sun, just make sure it's in a cool place. I always like to do stains at the end of the day. Okay. Finishes, it all really depends, but really at the hot part of the day between 2 and 5 is not the ideal time to put on a top coat because you're going to get bubbling. It's usually what happens. And then
if you've ever done epoxy, you'll recognize that picture because epoxy does a lot of the same thing sometimes.
That's true.
When it starts to cure up, it creates those bubbles.
And the reason for epoxy, though, is it actually is usually a thermal reaction. So it gets hot on its own because it's part A and part B. So there's a few things you can do to remedy that. One is raise the grain of the wood. Okay. You excite those fibers. They also tend to keep the air not so much falling into it or getting trapped in there. But when I say raising the grain, I just want you to know that. So if you're sanding it with 100, 150, and 180, whatever your sanding sequence is, I don't care if it's up to 1,000. You want to be the wood whisperer. Doesn't matter. Whatever the sequence is, the next to last grit. So in this case, it would be for me 150. After I do a 150, I'll raise the grain, just regular warm water, just room temperature. It doesn't have to be hot. Doesn't have to be cold. It just needs to be regular room temperature. I excite the grain, and all I do is wait for it to dry. You'll see a color change in all wood. When you wet it, it gets darker typically. Then feel it with your hand, and you can really feel a lot of the grain being raised. You can also see imperfections like here. You can see a lot of scratches that pop up. Usually they'll be lighter instead of darker, but you'll find things that are imperfections, but you're going to take them down whenever you go to do your next grit. So it's a real quick in-between step that'll save you a lot of time, give you a little insurance too.
You want to feel that stubble.
You want to feel that stubble. There you go. All right, so we talked about contaminants, surface contaminants. General oil. I do not believe that mineral oil is a finish. It is a treatment. There you go. That'll upset everybody as well. Mineral oil is really good. Don't get me wrong. It's great for so many things, but it technically never really dries. Like it'll dry up some, but in wood, it's always going to kind of be there. So that's why it does a really good job of repelling. The downside is it also wipes off and washes off very easily too. So it won't be very much longer before that's gone. So if anything, try to find a mineral oil with a beeswax. That's a very food safe, centuries long old food safe finish is beeswax or mineral oil and beeswax, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think it's actually, if you ever have been to Biltmore, that was built on the entire industry of mineral oil. So mineral oil for me is just a treatment. It is not a finish. Also, Danish oil is a treatment that is not a finish. That's another one's going to really, if you want to fight me on it, see me in the comments below. Oh, let's see. Hold on a second. Gerald said, do you recommend burying the grain? Raise the grain, then apply enough finish to overcoat the raised grain. Certain situations will call for that. I don't think that would be a general rule of thumb in finishing. I think to raise it and then to cut it, I think raising it for the most part really shows anyone, whether they are a perfectionist or a beginner, some things they may have missed in the finish of the wood and the sanding process. So that's why I like raising the grain. That's why I like telling people just to raise it. It kind of teaches them things that they didn't realize they were missing. At the same time, it gives a very consistent finish when you do like a 180 over that. It's a very nice stopping point. There's another thing I missed. I apologize. So anything past 220 is going to be burnishing the wood. You're basically polishing the wood. Okay. When you polish the wood, you close off those fibers to where finish isn't going to have anything to really grab a hold of and to bond with and to chemically bond to mechanically bond with. The problem with that is that then scratches are very easy to happen. You could scrape off the finish, flaking, peeling. There's a lot more issues when you don't have something to grab a hold of. So I always like 180 as a good stopping point. And in a way, you could call that overfilling the grain because really there's so much grain being exposed still that you could kind of call it that. But no, I like epoxy for that, as a matter of fact. And a lot of people, I haven't told you that. I know I haven't told you that, Chris, but if you're doing an epoxy finish, raise the grain and then overfill. And what that does is it actually gives your air bubbles a channel to follow out and get out of there. Instead of when you lower the grain and you have an air bubble trapped, it takes a lot longer to get up past. If you actually excite the grain, it'll shoot right out a lot quicker with the blowgun or the heat gun. So,
I got something.
Go.
There's one time or some applications where in your general sanding of a part, let's say you're just sanding a board, where you do want to sand at least part of that board, at least 1 grit finer in the range. And if you're watching this after the fact, pause and think about it. If you're watching it now, you're just going to get the bonus question with an answer already applied. That is your end grain. Because those end grain are like little straws and they just suck that moisture up. So you do want to sand those finer so that it closes those off. If you've ever looked at a door that's been stained and you've noticed that it's got a really strong, darker color on the end grain, that's most of the time why, because it's soaking that in before it gets a chance to properly dry. So by sanding it a little finer, bonus tip tonight.
How many grits finer is the standard?
At least 1, sometimes 2.
2 is usually going to get you the same coloration and finish as your surface or your edge grain. Yep. Good catch. I forgot all about that one. I don't have a picture of a door anywhere in here.
Sorry, I had my straw thing that I made years ago. I had that in my head and I was like, oh yeah, there we go.
So Chris and I had done a lot of trainings, and we started out doing trainings together, and we had to come up with these visual representations to show the people who had never been in woodworking before what kind of we're talking about. Because when you say, like, that's why I do the grass is green, because everyone's seen grass. At some point in your life, you've actually touched, laid on it, mowed it, whatever. Everyone's very familiar with grass. So I always think that, I'm not that grass. But I always think that somewhere along the lines, that would kind of help convey. So, the straws, we got to bring them back, man. Got to find that. Yeah. So that was the bubbly floor. Let's talk about lacquer. So lacquer is what I use mainly because I see that we're running low on time. Here in this picture is what's called a heat mark. This is when you typically have a lacquer finish. You put a hot plate on, and in this case here, it's one of those rubber kind of plate savers, so they don't scratch the table. Well, they do a really good job of turning it white whenever there's a hot plate on it. And what that is basically it's just kind of the moisture in the air trapped between the lacquer and the whatever the rubber mat. Sorry. The heat actually softens the lacquer. The moisture attaches to it, and then the lacquer hardens whenever it cools off, and then you get moisture stuck to it. Same idea in blushing. Blushing is a property of, I like to think of it as dew in the morning. You know how grass always seems to have that dew in the morning? Whenever you're finishing something, if it's 100 degrees outside, even when you're spraying a lacquer, you're atomizing it, causing it to get cooler a lot quicker when it hits the surface. So then you have any moisture in the air. You almost have this atmospheric fallout where the moisture in the air comes over the piece and then it just falls onto it. And it causes this kind of milky prismatic look to it. Almost looks like a rainbow. It's not very pretty. It removes all the sheen from it too. It's like dead dull. If you do it right though, at the same time, it can have a really cool finish. But anyways,
almost a whitewash.
Almost a whitewash look. Yeah. So what you do to combat that, here is your secret product for today. No blush retarder, blender. whatever it may be. Basically, butyl acetate with flattening compound in it. What this is going to do is melt your lacquer. It is highly potent in the smell department, so you probably don't want to spray it when everyone's still there for Thanksgiving. Maybe you do. I mean, it all depends on what kind of Thanksgiving you're going for. But what this does is it will remelt the lacquer, releasing that moisture and the heat mark from it. Also scratches too, because what it does is lacquer is a great principle of melting. Okay, so it melts and it kind of melts into its next layer, and so they become a married layer of melting. This is what you do to kind of remove those real quick and easy. A little spot shot. Now they make flat, they make satin, they make gloss. That's because if you're trying to spray this onto a flat finish and you use a gloss blender, it's going to get shinier because it also kind of not removes the flattening compound, but it settles it to the bottom so you don't see it. Ooh, let's go into products. Not yet. I'm so excited. Sorry. So much to do. So little time. All right. So finishing properties and blah, blah, blah. No,
And I can tell you that stuff right there, especially if you spray a lot of aerosols like I do, because a lot of my projects are small, so I don't need a big gun just yet. And so I use a lot of those aerosol lacquers, and those really do help. So even if you're sort of a beginner or even just maybe a little more advanced than a beginner, those are fantastic. They're very user friendly and easy to use, and they do work. I can tell you from my beginner aerosol experience.
That's right. Now, if you are a guitar finisher, that is your secret weapon right there, because usually you do a lot of aerosol can on guitars. They're small. You don't need to set up, put a whole lot into a spray gun. What these do though is that if you've ever sprayed anything, especially even a table, if you've ever sprayed anything, you kind of got these dry overlap marks where they look like lines and you can see them from the spray. This will help blend all of that together to make it look like a nice cohesive coat, like you sprayed it with a big gun. All right, so when we're talking about sheen, oh gosh, put that arm down.
Not Charlie.
Let's see, how many don't have anything good. Okay, so I like to use the light reflection principle. I don't know if that's a thing. That's just what I've kind of gotten to know it over the years. Basically, if you were to look at a finish and you wanted to find out if it's a satin, a semi-gloss, a gloss, a high gloss, this is how you tell. One, if it's satin, you'll notice in the picture on the left-hand side on the floor, you can make out that there's 3 windows there. You can see the divider. But you really can't make out the fact of how many of those little slat pieces are in there. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head what they're called. Gerald will tell me.
Millions.
Okay. But you can't make out what size they are, how many they are. You can't make any of that out. So satin does this. Now, if this was a matte to a flat finish, you actually wouldn't be able to make out the center dividers between the windows. It would all just be one kind of casting of light across the finish. That's how you can tell, or a good way to look at it. Semi-gloss, and I know the floor is rough on this, but in semi-gloss, you can really see that there's Venetian blinds in that floor. You can see that they go left to right if you look at it. Well, obviously, if you look at it, you can see it, duh. But you can see a lot more, like that door over to the left-hand side. You can see there's a gap. That's a baby gate. You can actually see the reflection pretty good and make out what that is, okay? When you get to gloss, you can actually get a real good definition of reflection. So now your light spread is much tighter. You can actually see trees now through that finish. You can actually see did you say mullions?
Mm-hmm.
You can see everything about the window. You can actually make it out. You could tell me how many panes there are there. So that's what gloss is. When you get to the high gloss, and we're talking piano finish, we're talking that real reflective, deep finish, you can read the light bulb. That's when you've gotten to the highest gloss. What this is basically nothing more than just how much it reflects back the light. So here in this case, you can actually read the light bulb. You can see that is a high gloss finish, beautiful in depth. One thing you'll notice though is that when it comes down to the satin, there's kind of like this milkiness to it in a way. It's not crystal clear. It doesn't have that type of look. There you can see everything about that piece of wood. Gloss is more clear, but I'm going to ruin everybody's day. When you do flat, it does not mean it is harder. Or sorry, when you do gloss, it does not mean it's harder than flat. That is an older way of things that used to be, because a lot of times they use what was cotton to make a flattening compound, if you will, as a powder. You could add it to whatever you wanted to. It didn't matter if it was water-based, latex paint, oil, didn't matter. And that made it softer. The flatter you went, it made it softer. Now everything's all synthetic. So really the only thing you lose is clarity between a flat and a gloss. But do not let anyone tell you that, oh no, you have to have a gloss finish because it's harder and more durable. Gloss scratches show up easier because it is such a clear finish. That's the only difference. So
And if you're going to use gloss, you better have spent that extra time in your sanding process, or you're going to be hating life for sure.
I'll tell you right now, see how that reflects like glass? The only reason that a high gloss finish that you can read the light bulb is if you polish it out and flatten it like glass. That's really the only way you're going to get it. Otherwise, you're just going to get basically reflections of leaves and the trees and stuff like that. You could probably make out the bulb if that was a very flat floor. But as you can tell here, because the floor is not flat, just like wood, if you don't flatten it out, then your gloss is going to look a little bit more semi-gloss. That's really why I did these pictures. I like the floors as far as showing you. This here is a Waterlocks floor. Waterlocks is a, let's see, 1912, I think it is, or 1903. It's an original tung oil finish, 93% tung oil. Tung oil is the oldest finish that's ever been around. It's pressed from a tung tree, the nut. It leaves a very nice lasting resin finish, very good outdoor finish. The difference though is that it can take up to 6 months for it to fully dry. But when it's dry, it is awesome. And you sent that picture, and I'm a slacker, and I did not save it, so I am sorry.
It's all good.
Apologies here.
Yeah, last year I went on a big Waterlocks run, and I was using it for almost all my projects because I just absolutely loved how it turned out. But like lacquer, if you get on that on a real high humid day and you try to be too aggressive with how thick of a coat you put on, it allows that moisture to sit in there, and then you get crust is the best way to put it.
Crust is a good way to put it. You didn't send it to that. That's why I didn't get it. Okay. So yes, Donald, thank you for joining us tonight. That's a new face for me. Gloss seems to highlight the errors. Yes, because of the clarity. I use a lot of flat because I need to get it done quickly. That is literally the reason I use flat. That, and I really like it when you can get it nice and level and you look down on the table and it looks glossy. That just trips me out because you can look at it on top and it's flat, but at the same time you can make it look really good. But yes, the reason the gloss will accent all of your errors is because it's so clear. There's no hiding or masking with the flattening compound. That's a good comment.
Welcome to the show, Donald.
Welcome to the show. So we've gotten into that. So now that we're talking about gloss finishes and everything else, let's ruin everybody's evening with the best thing to know. Don't use steel wool. Oh. Yeah, it's that easy.
You're going to try to rub people raw with that comment, I guarantee
you. I am. 4-aught you right out the door. It's a good product. It's great. But here's the issue that I find with steel wool when you really look at it. Now, I will say this. Andy Berkey really got me into the macro photography where you take very up close pictures of things, not on the microscopic side. But if you want to take like a really up close picture of a bug or a flower or something and really see the detail, what that's been showing me is how to take pictures of finishing and wood and things up close to really see what's going on. So, oh, wait, that's the wrong one. This one. So steel wool is nothing more than just steel fibers, okay? Strings, things along those lines. When you really, and for the most part, just looks like hair, you know? There's really no rhyme or reason to it. There's no direction to it whatsoever. And the problem is that when you really get up close, and this is a bigger chunk of steel, but this is all the same no matter what kind of steel wool it is that it's ribbons of steel. So you have like a dual knife cutting edge on steel wool. Works good for a lot of things. The things I don't like about it though is that imagine that you had a double-sided sword and you had like maybe 1,000 of them and they're just kind of dangling from some sort of suspended system. When you go to drag them across something, they're not all going to go the same way. Okay. Sandpaper, we know, goes the same direction no matter which way you take it. It's all going to go uniform in that direction. Steel wool kind of is like, well, I'm going to make a left here. And this one's like, well, I'm going to make a right there. And it's all over the place. And you have these really unequal slices into the finish. And I've seen a lot of people that try to apply wax with it, and then they show it to me. And I have to say that I'm kind. At any time anyone shows me any wood project, I am always kind to them about how much work, because I can see how much work they put into something. And I always ask them, when they say, "Hey, can you tell me about the finish? What do you think?" There is one question that comes out of my mouth. You want a sugar coat? You want the truth? I don't want to break anyone's heart whenever they're trying to tell me or show me something. So therefore I ask them that question, because if they're looking for like, how can I make it better? I can look at it and tell them how to make it better. I can look at it and tell them what they used 90% of the time. I'm no expert. I'm a guru. I love finishing. So I forgot to put that out right out. Yeah. Well, when you said there's, Mike's really good at it, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm a guru. I enjoy it, but I'm no expert. What was steel wool, you can tell right away that there was steel wool used. Also, a lot of time people use wax with it because steel wool is going to have oils in it. So you can't steel wool a water-based finish and then expect to put water-based over that. You would get something along the lines of that or these in a much more finer scale. So that's why I don't do steel wool. What can you do?
And it rusts.
And it does rust. And if you don't do it well, it can. And if you don't watch your fibers, they can get stuck in oak and walnut and rust there too. That always looks. Now, then again, that can be an interesting finish. There's no negative for finishing for me. Like, you can find the mistakes and make it cool. So here's steel wool, just running it across something, two different directions: north, south, east, west. As you can tell, there's some in here that looks like I did it at a 45-degree angle. And that's because whenever those little knives grab a hold, they're just going to go whatever direction they want to go. They're not going to follow in suit. They're not going to follow in line. They're going to just be basically wild knives. So that's why I don't do steel wool. What I do instead, non-woven, Scotch-Brite. Same basic principle. They're just a bunch of fibers that are put together, but they have an abrasive that's impregnated into them. Hey, real quick, is that correct? The non-woven is impregnated abrasive, or is it spray coated onto the abrasive as it's being made?
It's sort of a blend.
Okay,
but it's mostly the nylon fibers that are what's causing that aggression. Different, not density levels, but I'm trying to think of the right word.
Think of it and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I mean, as many times as I've looked at different products, I have to say that each one kind of has a twist on it. No one really says for sure how it's made. And of course, I need to get a better up close picture. See, getting into macro photography has been teaching me things like this. So let's just say they are grains of abrasive in the nylon web. But remember, whenever you have an abrasive grain stuck to something, it's going to follow that same line because it's not a sharp edge. Instead, it's just a kind of a blocky edge. So that's the other thing. Do you want it to be a sharp cut? If so, you want silicon carbide. Oh, there's a brain teaser. If you want more of like an ice cream scoop type of removal of your finish, which is not what you want for polishing, then you're going to want aluminum oxide. See, that can be a whole nother video. Good Lord. Basically, coarser grits, aluminum oxide, 400 plus, especially 600 if you want to do piano finish. You need to switch over to silicon carbide. Oh, we got more stuff. Yes, sir, Donald, not a problem. You're welcome. I never like using steel wool on wood. Well, not on bare wood. That would be a bad idea. But at the same time, even on finishes on wood, still not a good idea. And yes, if you want to fight me on it, absolutely hit me up in the comments below.
Now, didn't do it myself, but I was part of a couple of guys who are trying to do a cool treatment on oak. And I don't know the chemical they used, but whatever the chemical was, they used it in conjunction with steel wool on the bare wood, and they didn't wipe it off once they were done. They let everything dry. They left it on a little bit of time, and then they came back and blew it off, because what it did was that chemical had a reaction with the metal in the steel wool and created sort of an oxidation sort of effect on the surface of the wood. It was kind of a cool little effect, but then they, once they got the steel wool off, they did a light scuff and then put the finish on top, and it gave it a really cool rustic look.
So if you know what chemical that is, put it in the comments below.
Please.
I know what it is. And I'm going to tell you it's basically removal of carbon from the steel by using an acid to add the darkness to that. And that darkness really is almost like a dye. It's such a fine amount of carbon that's being released from that steel due to this particular chemical. No. Look at that. Look at these guys. Look at these guys already.
Vinegar's a good one. I've done that on metal.
And then acetic acid, vinegar. Yep. The stronger, the faster. That's the easiest way to do it. Well, okay. That was fun. So in the comments, hey, knock it out. So yeah, no matter what you do, no matter how you wad it up, steel wool never really gives you a consistent scratch. So that's why I'm not a big fan of it. I do not recommend it, but we can work with it. It's not a big deal. Like you can use it if you've used it for 40 years. That doesn't mean that you're wrong, but just look for your consistency and scratches. So what do we do all of this for? To the beauty of the Chatoans.
Finally, you showed my piece that I finished.
Was this yours?
No.
Also known as the cat's eye effect. It is that depth, that 3D look in wood is Chatoans. And that's what you're looking for. A nice quilted girly maple. Look at that.
If you're looking for a word of the day for tomorrow, chatoyance should be that word. Find a way to use it in a sentence and present it to all your friends.
That's right. But just don't compliment someone's eyes on it because that would get weird. So products I use, since we're well over time, here we go. I use a blend of gel stains. General Finishes gel stain. This is, by the way, 100% all of this, not sponsored. I buy this stuff with real hard-earned money. No one gives me this stuff. But General Finishes, I like the gel stain for the fact that it has a lot of heavy pigment in it. You can control it. I thin it down with a little bit of mineral spirits because mineral spirits gives it a little bit longer work time. If you try to apply this during a summer day, you're going to hate this product right off the bat. It dries so fast. And then if you try to overlap with wet stain, it actually pulls all the stain off. And now you get this funny, I call it ghost lines. So always remember about 8 o'clock in the summer evening, right when the sun hits that horizon, perfect time to start staining. It's still warm enough, but the atmosphere is not trying to evaporate so fast. Good time. Armor Seal or a flooring poly. I like flooring polys for tables because it's a very durable, high solids, which means it has a lot of resins. This is what you want to put on something that you want a good durable finish. Typically you want it flat, so bowls and stuff like that, maybe. But that oil gives you such a depth of color that you can't get from water-based. I don't use a lot of water-based. If I do, there's only 2 products. High performance, not gloss. I like the flat, but high performance General Finishes. And you'll notice there's a lot of General Finishes. I've gone through a lot of these products, and these I've gotten stuck on because I'm very consistent results. I'm very happy with it.
Very good quality product for sure.
Very good quality product. They have very high standards in their factory. I'm not going to say there might have been a case or two where they had a new person working and there might have been an issue here or there, but they catch it rather quickly and they call it back, which is also something I like. Not every finish is perfect. They're all mixtures of something. Something can go wrong in the chemistry. This exterior 450, one of the best I've used for exterior finish. And the reason being is that I have not had this yellow a lot. Usually your exterior finishes have a lot of tung oil. They have a lot of UV inhibitors. They actually turn yellow over time. They're plasticizers is what they're called. And those are naturally turn yellow. But they also keep the finish flexible and plasticky, kind of a good film, if you will. There's a barn sign that I did, purple, green, yellow, blue, and white. And still to this day, I think it's on 4 years now. Still to this day, it looks as bright colors as it did. It didn't turn the white yellow. It still looks awesome. So very big fan of it. But if you are doing fishing lures, if you're doing anything where you may be doing a lot more, hands-on, because this is good for all elements. But if you're doing something where you're going to be doing carvings, if you're going to be something where you want to do like smaller projects, I highly recommend the outdoor acrylic aerosol from Mohawk. Reason being is it dries fast like lacquer. Doesn't have a super heavy smell, but the outdoor properties of it are awesome. I'm really impressed with it. I put on a birdhouse, one half of a birdhouse, taped off the other half, sprayed it 3 coats. The other side, I did nothing with just to see what it would do, and it really held up really good. Now, obviously, on the side that I didn't put any finish, that did get underneath this finish. But for the most part, the grain wasn't there. It worked out really good. So my favorite lacquer top coat, the 614. Currently only available in North Carolina. You can get a 610 anywhere else in the country, unless you're California, then you can get a 612. But all the same thing, just different drying rates, different VOCs. This really has to be, I find it to be needing an easy vinyl sealer before you put this on if you're doing a tabletop, just so the build's a lot quicker and you can scuff a lot faster. But 1 sealer, 2 of these, good. You can put 3 on, but never, never, never exceed 7 mil thickness, and mils, the gauge. Easy vinyl sealer, also in white. Those are the 2 I use for sealing and painting all of the projects that I do. The no blush again. Get everyone ready for the 2 secret ingredients that every finisher, I think, really needs to have in the shop. Super no blush retarder. If you're ever going to do anything with spraying high volumes of lacquer, gallon, 5 gallon, this will help your overspray issues. This will help your orange peel issues. This will help many, many issues many people have whenever spraying a lacquer. Downside is when you apply a finish, it looks wet. And when that wetness, the moment it disappears, that's called flashing. Okay. When it starts to settle in, it starts to actually make the sheen it's going to be for the rest of its life. That's called flashing. This will add a little bit more time to that flash. And we're talking like 3 minutes, so if it's 15 minutes, well, no, for lacquer, let's say it's 8 minutes, maybe it's like 10 to 12 minutes now. Depends on how much you put in. But that 10 to 12 minutes will save you a lot of headache for all the other problems you can have with lacquer. So I highly recommend this. The other is flattening paste. I've got a couple of jobs that I've had where the customer's like, I need gloss. Well, I can only get it in gallons. I don't use gloss all that often. How can I fix gloss? Flattening paste. I can make it into satin, semi-gloss, flat, whatever I want. Flattening paste is handy to have for any nitrocellulose type of applications. It also works in any kind of oil base. So if you've got a satin armor seal and you want to add a little bit more flattening paste, you see what I'm saying? That is a good way to do it. And you got to watch your ratios, though, because sometimes you can overdo it and that'll turn into crackle paint. So if you want a really cool crackle paint, again, flattening paste. Ask me how I know. So
how do you know, Mike?
Yeah, I know. So that's a quick rundown of the stuff I use. It's not everything that I use. There's still a lot of other properties there and a lot of things I can go over and talk about. But given the fact it's an hour and 17 into this bad boy, I think we're good to go.
Hey, if you stuck with us, we appreciate it. I know there's a lot of information unpacked there, and leave us some comments if there's a sort of a portion of this you want us to go a little deeper in. Mike can certainly do that.
A little bit,
So I'm just here as a sidekick to talk whenever he's taking a breath or sipping on some water. When it comes to this topic, for sure.
Yeah. So, and we've done it before for work, and I've got to do it again for myself. Is just basically going over the 3 properties of finishing, that kind of stuff. Your oil, your water based, your alcohol finish, that kind of thing. So, if you have any questions, by all means, throw them down in the comments below. We will definitely get to them. Chris can answer a lot more than he says he does. He's learned quite a bit, so he can answer a lot of questions here.
I try to stay on the low end where I can.
No, he just tries to pretend he doesn't know. Real good episode, guys. Thank you, Kyle. I'll save this one to reference back to. Absolutely. You could share it with your CNC group, because I know that with CNC, there's a lot of people that are trying finishes out there, and sometimes they run into issues. The biggest issue I find for them is their in grain to edge grain transition on 3D carvings.
Yep. So what I was going to suggest is Mike, I think that would be a cool segment to do a whole topic on aerosols, because a lot of the guys doing those carvings like I do, they use a lot of the aerosols to do that. And I've learned quite a bit from, like you said at the beginning, you've made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot of what not to do when it comes to some of those. So stuff like that, I think that's a cool topic. And you got a really good talk on just those aerosol cans that floored me the first time I heard it. So
Yeah, we can definitely do that. That'll be, we can make, like I said, we can make shows out of finishing alone. We can tackle, if you want to have a show from us just based on aerosol cans, let us know. This is the things that we know. We want to share our experience and our heartaches and the lessons we have learned to help you not have to do them. By all means, I want to make finishing fun. I really do. And I don't want to be one of those guys. It's like, oh, hey, let's make finishing fun. It'll be great. No, I don't have, robot friends. I'm trying to think of Duff. That's it. Yeah. Happy Cake Fun Time or something. I saw that and I was like, dude, he is so going 70s. This is great. Thank you, Gerald. It was a great discussion. I really want to sit and talk with you because I think there's a lot of cool things that that I probably don't. I know I don't know a lot of them. Donald, hey, I'm glad you found us too. By the way, this will be forever on Facebook as well as on YouTube. So by all means, reference it back, save it, however you want to do it that works for you,
Yeah.
And if you have some questions or anything like that, or if you've got a project that you've done and you had some issues, take that photo, comment below, let us know if there's a way that we can help you with that or kind of give you an idea of what could be the issue. We're more than happy to help. Like, it's a podcast, but at the same time, we do this during the day. So we really want to extend this at night as well, on our personal side, for us to help.
Well, and we wanted this also. I mean, when we first started talking about doing this, we wanted this to be an outlet where it wasn't just two guys talking, about woodworking stuff, but we wanted it to be to where we start to build a community where if you've got questions throughout the week, even if it doesn't have anything to pertain to the topic we had, and you message one of us or you reach out to us through the whatnot, one of the social media sites, if we can talk back and forth a little bit. And if you're interested, we could certainly bring your topic on and have a whole show on that, or maybe even integrate you into that to explain more in depth on your problem. Because that's the whole idea, is we want to build this woodworking community, because right now woodworking it's sort of a lost art. Everybody just wants to just breeze through and not know where a lot of the troubleshooting comes from, and a lot of the other issues as far as building goes. We want to make this an outlet where we can all learn and share all of our knowledge. You got folks like Gerald there, who's doing a lot of the older school kind of projects, period type pieces,
and a lot of heritage type. It's great.
You got guys like me who absolutely hate finishing, so I've learned little shortcuts to get me through. And then you got guys like Mike who could probably care less about building. He just wants to finish it. So we all have different interests when it comes to this vast thing of woodworking.
I tell you right now, I really, really would love to do like a 3-month, or actually, let's be more reasonable here, a 3-week build. I really would want to do that again. Like, it's been a long time. Finishing, though, I'm going to tell you, if you get into it, it will keep sucking you back in. It's one of those things that if you want to go down that road, if you want to go down that road and people are like, oh, hey, you kind of good at this. Hey, can you do this? And can you do that? It's like, yeah, I guess I can. Next thing I know, and I'm very blessed to have as much business as we do on the side. But at the same time, I really would like to build something. Every time I go to build something, like, I have to hurry. Yep. The more I share, the more I learn. That is exactly right, Donald. 100%. I'm finding that out because also, Gerald said that you go bald if you hold too much information in your head.
I don't know what information they hold on to, but man, I apologize.
You don't know what you're holding in there.
I don't know what information I've held back, but whatever it is, come on out of there. Let's share it and get my hair back.
Kyle, you could send a project. Hey, I don't mind doing a collaboration with you. If you want to ship me something and I'll finish it for you. I really don't have a problem with it. It's just time wise. Like, my neighbor was so funny, and I'll do this and we'll go. He has his mother's piece, and it's a really, really cool piece. So I can't wait to finish it. But don't worry, I'm going to do it natural. So I'm not going to spray over a solid cherry 10-quarter hand carved piece that everyone on social media went freaking ballistic over. That's why I didn't post the final pictures yet, by the way, because I was like, I'm just going to take a break from this one. That 1932 walnut bed set, and now this one. Yeah, I don't know how I only have 1,000 followers. But he drops it off, and he's just like, my sister has put a mini fridge on it for the past 10 years, and now the veneer on top is all peeling off. Is there anything you can do? I said, well, I don't think I could save this veneer. It's in bad shape. I said, but I'm looking underneath there and it looks like it's chestnut. I was like, yes. I said, worst case is we'll take all this veneer off. I'll sand it. I'll stain it. I'll make it look like it was part of it and you'll be good to go. He said, I'm real sentimental over this piece and it is awesome piece. So I cannot wait to show you that one. But just stuff like that. And he said, you know what, get to it when you can. I know you're busy because, you know, he drives by every day. So he sees what we're doing on the weekend. He's like, so whenever you get to it, it's fine. So it's one of those pieces that I'm going to have fun with. I think I may just do a whole video on that piece because it's cool. It's a chest, but it was before the lanes and everything, carved feet. I don't know. It's really cool. So I'm excited for that one. But
yay.
Yeah, right.
Like
it's
a lot of sanding and a lot of finishing. Yay.
No, it's just cleaning it up. Luckily, just removing the mold, stuff like that. It's gonna be great. So yeah, something that won't be white. I'm excited.
You have been doing a lot of white lately.
Oh my gosh, I'm not complaining. At least it's easy. So if you want to follow me and what I do, usually on the weekends only, because I'm tired on the week.
Go do it
during the week. Yeah, during the week.
Do it.
There's some things I'll sneak in there just because I'm having fun. Instagram, Dustyle1, Chris. If you want to find him and everything he's doing, the banner's behind him to the left of his head. It's his right. Nice job. Instagram.com, Christ Cross Crafts or Christ Cross Crafts.
Go there.
Yeah, the White Knot Podcast. Go there. Also, we'll have this on audio for later on. And I think that's it. I'm looking, blotching. Is it really a problem? Yeah. So I had all kinds of banners. I forgot about them. So thank you again. We appreciate you.
Shoot us some topic ideas you want to hear, please. We're looking for things that you want to hear, not just stuff that we want to talk about.
And if you'd really like to support us in everything that we do off topic, Patreon, I think may have it set up. I don't remember for sure, but Patreon will definitely help us out in getting more, because, you know, making samples like this costs a little bit of dough like that.
And, yeah, and time. But anyway, we appreciate you watching for free.
For free.
And thanks for coming back for those who've been here a couple of times. And we appreciate Donald stepping in for the first time. Hopefully we'll see him again.
Yeah, thank you very much. And everyone, I hope you have a great evening. This is the Whatnot Podcast. I'm MikeZ.
Still Chris.
All right. Oh, there you go. Kyle says shop organization and shop hacks.
You know, we talked about that as a topic today. Matter of fact, or whenever it was. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a little bit of list organization. Well, we had a little bit of that as far as in one video, we had a little hit on that. I got to clean mine if I'm going to show any hacks. But yeah, no, shop hacks are fine. Just okay, real quick. The hardest thing is trying to know if it's a hack or just something that you accidentally stumbled upon. Like putting the holes in top of a gallon can or a quart can. So therefore any finish you get around the rim falls back into the can when you put the lid on. I didn't realize that was a hack. I just been doing it because I get tired of cans getting stuck to the lid. So stuff like that. We'll cover it. Let's do that. Let's do the next one.
Sure.
All right.
We'll hack it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much. I'm out.
Have a great night.
See you later. See you next week, Wednesday, 9 p.m.